Can you hear it? The pulse of our region. It's starting to sound like progress. It's happening here, and here, and there, all around us. We're gaining momentum and catalyzing change. But it doesn't happen on its own. We need each other. Every person, every business, every organization, we all play a role. We're leading. We're collaborating. We're growing. Yeah, we've had some wins. But we still have work to do. We're leveraging our assets, investing in innovation, and creating opportunities for everyone here to share in this momentum. The pulse of our region is strong, it's steady, it's rhythmic. Can you hear it? Can you see it? Are you a part of it? Every beat represents the commitment, the drive, the determination that is uniquely Akron. Our progress is palpable, but we've only just begun. We're gaining traction and building something powerful, something together, something greater.
Good morning, and welcome to this morning's Leadership Dialogue, focused on the economic impact of women in the workplace. Before we begin, I'd like to take a moment to thank our sponsors. Our presenting sponsors today are Akron Children's Hospital, Brous McDowell, Huntington, Key Bank, Retzel, State and Federal Communications, the Akron Beacon Journal, and Local IQ. And our premier sponsors include Cohen & Company, Goodyear, Great Work, Sikich, SummaCare, and Team Neo. Their investment and support allows us to bring important content like this morning's to business leaders like you free of charge. The Chamber is focused on advancing catalytic opportunities that help companies in the region to grow and to address barriers that get in the way of this growth. Our work is done with intention, and our goal is to create an inclusive economic environment that's strong and vibrant for the companies and the employees that call Greater Akron home. Economic vibrancy is dependent on many factors, and oftentimes we use forums like this to bring awareness to key initiatives, issues, and opportunities that have the ability to catalyze or impede our regional economic growth. This morning, in partnership with the Women's Network Leadership Institute, we're focusing on the impact that women have on business and the economy, and the importance of fostering an environment within our companies and within our region that supports the growth and advancement of our female leaders, business owners, and employees. Prior to the pandemic, gender-based disparities existed for women, and particularly for women of color. However, the pandemic has widened these gaps even further, leading to what many are calling a she-cession. For the first time, job losses during an economic downturn are disproportionately felt by women. The pandemic has shed light on the disparities that exist for women in the workplace and has amplified them. So much so that throughout the pandemic, 1 in 4 women indicated that they were considering downsizing their jobs or leaving the workforce entirely. For additional perspective, according to the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, there were 2.2 million fewer women in the labor force in October 2020 than there were in October 2019. There are many factors contributing to the dramatic decrease in female participation in our labor market, and the implications of this are widespread, particularly to business and the economy on a local and national level. A vibrant economy relies on the participation of men and women operating at their highest potential. Companies, and particularly leadership teams and boards, are more innovative, creative, and profitable when they're comprised of racially and gender diverse talent. Without women in the workforce and active participants in this economy, there are catastrophic losses that could be felt for decades. I've had hundreds of conversations over the last 18 months with business leaders in Greater Akron and around the country. Regardless of industry, size, or location, the single biggest challenge is workforce, and particularly attracting and retaining a diverse workforce. Knowing that nearly half of the workforce is comprised of women, it's an economic imperative to ensure that women are not only participating, but doing so at their highest potential and with growth in mind. And that's exactly what we're here to talk about today. Today's panel is comprised of a very diverse subset of perspectives that will help us understand the economics of women in the workplace, the unique barriers and challenges that exist for women, and the actionable things that companies and leaders can do to drive real change in their businesses today. To introduce our panelists this morning, we have Elizabeth Bartz, President and CEO of State and Federal Communications. Elizabeth is a staunch advocate for women and continues to help to set the tone for the type of commitment that companies can and should have to advancing the growth of the women in their workforce. Thanks for being here today, Elizabeth, and for all that you do for the Chamber and our region. With that, I'll turn it over to you and introduce our panelists.
Thanks, Steve. I am happy to be here this morning to address this important topic. As you've said, women play a critical role in the workplace, from driving performance and innovation to increasing the competitiveness in labor markets. The economy is stronger when women participate in equal force. It's no secret to our panelists today, women have been impacted by the pandemic at a disproportionate rate, and Black women even more so. If our region and our country are to recover and grow, we must recognize the importance of the female labor markets and address the unique challenges and barriers it faces. Our panel this morning represents a unique set of perspectives on the topic, and I'm thrilled to have the opportunity to introduce them today. Let's begin with Chuck Mullen, Chairman at Apple Growth Partners. Chuck specializes in tax and international tax and is located in the Akron office. He provides tax and accounting services to closely held companies and individuals, manages review services, and assists with financial and strategic planning. He also provides management and business operations consulting and tax planning services to corporations, partnerships, and individuals. Chuck holds a Bachelor of Science degree in accounting and a Master of Taxation degree from the University of Akron. Under his leadership, Apple Growth Partners has earned several prestigious regional and national awards recognizing employee culture, and the firm has experienced 90% revenue growth during his 5-year tenure thus far. Chuck joins us today to share with us his perspective on the critical impact women play at Apple Growth Partners and the work he's done and continues to do to ensure women are well positioned for growth and success at his firm. Next, I'd like to introduce you to Sarah Sanford. Sarah wants us to move from shared stories to shared data to solve gender inequity. She is the founder of Gender Equity Now and the architect behind the GEN certification, the first gold standard for U.S. businesses. She is also a lecturer at the University of Washington School of Information, where she teaches on the intersection of equity, ethics, and data. Sarah inspires audiences to believe equity and equality are within reach. She helps organizations embrace the idea that changing mechanics, rather than mindsets, can create lasting change at scale. Unlike many trainings on diversity, which bring awareness of the barriers to equity but fail to educate attendees on what steps to take next, Sarah's workshops emphasize tangible solutions business leaders can incorporate into their organization's culture starting right now. The data-driven tools Gender Equity Now has developed are unparalleled in the United States. Sarah is a popular TED Talk speaker and also has been interviewed by the New York Times. Finally, I'd like to introduce Dr. Amanda Weinstein. Amanda is an assistant professor in the Department of Economics at the University of Akron. Her research focuses on the determinants of urban and regional economic development and women in the economy. She received her PhD from The Ohio State University, and before starting her doctorate program, she worked as a senior business analyst at Bearing Point and was a commissioned officer in the United States Air Force after graduating from the United States Air Force Academy. Amanda's perspectives and research on the economics of women in the workplace will be critical for our conversation today. Our panel this morning will be moderated by Carla Chapman, Chief Diversity Officer for Akron Public Schools. Carla began her career with APS in 1994. As an Akron native, she has dedicated her career to advocating for urban families and children. Carla earned her Bachelor of Arts degree from The Ohio State University and a Master of Arts degree from the University of Akron, both degrees in the study of family and consumer science. In her first job with APS, Carla worked as the Enterprise Community Family Services Liaison for several inner-city schools in low-income neighborhoods. After, she became a social services specialist for the district, where she coordinated several local, state, and federal grant projects serving students in grades K through 12, bringing many organizations together in a creative partnership with APS. Carla then became a special projects coordinator, where she developed a nationally recognized after-school model called Perkins Activities Central. In her current position, Carla works to increase community awareness and cultural understanding within the district to better support effective programs and services. I am so impressed with the experience of our panelists, and I'm looking forward to hearing more about their insights. With that, I will turn it over to you, Carla.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Looking forward to moderating today's panel. So let's not waste any time. Let's get started with some level setting around women and the economy. We're going to talk a little more about the role women play in the economy and in business. But what does that look like at the macro and micro levels? And so let's talk and explore that topic a little more. So, Amanda, I'm going to start with you. At a macro level, what role do women play in the economy generally, and how important are women to the economy given their roles as consumers and entrepreneurs?
Thank you, Carla, and thank you to the Chamber for having me here today. I'm excited to be here talking about this topic. So when we think about women's role in the economy, I think about data. I know Sarah is a big data person. I think about time use survey data. And what time use survey data shows is that women spend twice as much time as men purchasing goods and services. Women make an estimated 70 to 80% of all household consumption decisions. And it's even higher for certain goods and services. So in my home, I make 100% of the decisions about furniture, right? That's not average. So on average, women make about 94% of the decisions about home furnishings. So what that means is women's buying power is outsized in this economy. So if you want to sell your goods and services, you most likely have to know how to sell them to women. And that means that you need to understand what women want and what women need. And men aren't known for being the best at knowing what women want and need, right? So that means you need women, and you need women in your place of employment that have a better handle on what women want and need. And it's not simply hiring women. Women have to be at the table. They have to be decision makers. They have to be leaders in their company, not just hiring one woman and expecting them, to change everything by themselves, especially when they don't have a seat at that decision-making table.
Thank you, Amanda. We definitely do have buying power. I completely agree with that, and women are needed in the economic space. Sarah, I know you've done a lot of work on the impact of diversity among teams and organizations. When we spoke, you talked about the concept of collective intelligence. What is that, and how do women and diversity in general impact productivity, innovation in the workplace?
Great question, Carla, and it's great to be back. And also thank you to the Chamber. Someone's already said time use survey data as the sun's coming up here on the West Coast. So it's a great panel as far as I'm concerned. It's great to be with you all. So it's funny when I hear collective intelligence, I always think of Billy Beane and Moneyball and the 2002 Athletics. It's always this perfect analogy for it, where he took a $44 million baseball club and made it compete with the $125 million New York Yankees. And he really did that by valuing complementary strengths. So traditionally in baseball, we used to look for this really narrow set of metrics. We used to look at like home run averages and batting averages. And what Billy Beane did is say, hey, let's expand the scope of what we consider to be valuable, of what we should look for. And he starts looking at, slugging percentage, on-base percentage. And what that meant was that, if you have more players with on-base percentage, which people didn't care much about at the time, someone was already on base when the home run guy came to the plate. And so then you end up, if he hits a home run, you're getting 2 runs instead of 1. And so, we really saw this great example of underestimated strengths amplifying the benefits of more traditionally valued players. And so we see this play out in businesses too. When we talk about collective intelligence, Carnegie Mellon especially has done a ton of great research around this, that when you add someone underrepresented, or I like to say underestimated, to the team, you're not just getting that individual's add-on value, is that they make everyone else on the team more effective as well. So companies tend to hire for the same kind of leadership traits over and over again. We talked about how there are actually like 20 traits that make a good leader, and businesses tend to just hire for the same 2 traits. So they hire for extroversion and technical skills. But if you have people with extroversion and technical skills, and then you bring in someone who has high emotional intelligence, high group sensitivity, what that person is able to do is say, okay, I'm going to filter what is being said from the technical people and the extroverts and make this into something that's meaningful for everyone else. So they've amplified the strengths of everybody else in the group. And that's what we really talk about it as being multiplicative instead of additive when we think about adding women or underestimated groups to a team.
Yeah.
Sarah, that's such a good point, and I love the way that you stated it. So we find a lot in research that men and women are actually complements in production, which means that when you add women, it actually helps men out. So I found that for every 10% increase that you have women participating in the labor force, wages increase in real terms by 5%, which 5% doesn't seem like a lot, but you have a lot of cities across this country, when you account for inflation, have seen decreases in wages. So a 5% increase in real wages is a big deal, and that's including for men. And so I love the way that you put this, that you have this multiplicative thing, and it's not a zero-sum game, right? They can help everyone in the company, including men.
Yeah, very
That's
good
a great
point.
And I want to point out too, I'm a guy. I've been a guy for many years, and in 30 years, I'm still going to be a guy. What I don't know about women's needs could fill the Library of Congress. And so I think, Amanda, you bring up a great point. Men have to surround themselves with female leaders, have to. In fact, in our firm, if I know that I'm filling a male role in this panel, but actually in our firm, our president is Erica Ishida, and she would have made a great panelist today. But I'm filling a certain demographic today. But great point.
Well, Chuck, we're so happy to have you here. We need your perspective as well. So, and we know that you'll represent well, right?
Thank you. Thank you.
So I do want to say that you've been very intentional about having women play key roles in your firm. And I want to talk a little more about why that's so important to you. Why do you feel that there's this competitive advantage to having women in key leadership roles?
Well, in the first part, accentuating Amanda's point about surrounding yourself with females. I am a guy. I will never understand female needs, and I would be the last person to roll out a program or an initiative for females in our firm. But I know enough to know what I don't know, and so I surround myself with strong female leadership. And then we collaborate together on it. And I'll say this, while I don't like to stereotype or place a group of people in a certain box, you have asked the question, and I will say, I find women consistently to be thoughtful and deep thinking when it comes to solutions and decision making. And when given the safe space to do so, I find women seem to be more willing to tell you what's wrong, which is 5 times more important than being told what's right. Women leaders I work with are awesome and constantly tying initiatives and conversations to the larger picture. So I find working with women, especially in the leadership roles, to be just so enlightening, because I feel that women just do an awesome job of tying the everything to the big picture. And I'm not going to say that men don't do that, but my experience has been women do a great job at that.
Thank you, Chuck. And you know, the research is very clear on diversity in thought contributing to the performance of teams within an organization. So we're right on point with that discussion. Anything else to add there, Sarah or Amanda?
I mean, one of the things that came to mind for me as you were talking is that women will be able to tell you what's wrong or give you that kind of feedback as long as you as a leader promote that, as long as you support that, you know. So I just kind of wanted to note and applaud that also clearly speaks to your organization, because, you know, I've worked in and we've seen a lot of data that does not show that, you know, women are always welcome to give that kind of feedback. So it's also that you have to create an organization that promotes it. So if women are doing that in your workplace, well done. It means you've done something right.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you.
Yeah, I would second that, Sarah. And I think you've created an environment where women realize that when they see something wrong, it doesn't mean that they're not loyal to that job. And it doesn't mean they don't care about that job. It means that actually they care, right? My husband probably gets irritated, but when I'm nitpicking, right, it's because I care. It's because we care. So let us care. And right, we want to see the company, we want to see it succeed. And one way to do that is, you know, we find ways that it could be better.
Yeah, that's a great point, Amanda. What I find often is those healthy arguments that you have about what you know, I'll come up with what I think is a great idea. It's 1 in 10 is a great idea. All right. The rest of them are just so or really bad. What I find though is the so ones, it's not like we nix the idea, we just make it into something better. And that, but to Sarah's point, you have to have a safe space where people feel empowered to be able to speak up and tell you you're wrong. If you want to win, you got to be able to be told you're wrong. And I'm told I'm wrong quite a bit.
Well, Chuck, we're going to work on making sure that you give yourself some credit in creating that type of workplace environment. And that takes a certain level of vulnerability too on the part of a leader to be open to the idea of having some critique, right, of our practices, our thinking, our ways of doing business. So thank you for that. So we're going to move to the next topic around barriers that women face. And we understand that women play a key role in the economy, but want to talk some about the real unique challenges and barriers that women face and those things that make it harder to participate and advance, and even at the earliest of ages. So Sarah, I'm going to start out from the perspective of early childhood, something near and dear to my heart as one working in the education space. You spoke about the difference in the ways boys and girls are treated at even a young age when we talked, and the different paths they are encouraged to take from a career standpoint. What does this look like? How does it position girls and women for careers in their futures?
Interesting. So I'll be honest that, you know, the work I do and we do focuses a lot less in terms of our research on, you know, what discipline or field girls versus boys are encouraged to go into, but we do look at what behavior is encouraged and discouraged. And we really see that starting in 3rd grade, girls are called on less often, even if they have their hands up as often as boys. They're, called louder, disciplined. They speak out in class more often than boys are. And that's really when we start to push girls towards caution and away from risk. So it's the, be careful running, you'll get hurt. And it's also, we end up putting more of an emphasis on perfection for girls than we do for boys. And so I think what this does and how this plays out when we think about the workplace is that, then you have girls less likely to really be enthusiastic or feel comfortable about fields that are associated with risk. So I think of finance, a sector I used to work in that's really associated with high risk, high reward. I think of tech, out here in Seattle, where it's like you can't get away from the phrase fail fast. I don't think fail fast is something that we're telling girls in schools, as much as we're telling boys. And it's also when we start to shape attitudes around competition. So it's interesting. I always hear this thing, oh, women are competition adverse. And I cringe a little bit because I don't think it's inherently part of who we are. It's something that we have been taught is not likable, to be publicly competitive, because the research shows that if women aren't seen competing, they'll be very competitive behind the scenes. We're okay with doing something that others in which they don't see us winning. But if we have an audience, we're not supposed to be. And so we even saw this play out, unfortunately, with SAT scores. There was a review of SAT scores that found that women's scores increased when they took the test in less crowded rooms and in rooms with fewer men in them. So even though test takers are obviously aware that thousands of people may be taking the test on the same day, the reminder of competition embedded in, getting into college and having so many other people there was enough to impact how they were thinking and operating during the test. So they're all just behaviors that we see play out later, in the workforce.
Yeah, thank you for that. There's tons of research, right, on this whole idea of gendered classrooms and the relationships that are built between teachers and students and peers within education spaces. Dr. Weinstein, anything else to add there?
Yeah, so Sarah said it very well. So we do see even, early on, before third grade, as Sarah said, there are differences between boys and girls. But when your brain is, that malleable, the differences are quite small, but you can mold it to magnify those differences, which is essentially what happens in that classroom. And it changes the skill set, but it also might not change who that kid is, but it changes whether or not they show it to you. So a lot of businesses, you need to be risk takers. You need to be competitive. And women are taught, as Sarah said, not to show it. So you have to create a space, be more intentional that they can show you their competitive side. They can show you their risk taking. And often, even when we think about things like risk, we often measure it in kind of a male-centric way. Like when you think of something that's really risky, right? Think of something like that might cause death, right? So jumping out of an airplane, right? We think that's super risky, right? You think, oh, men would be more likely to do that to women, right? Women don't take the risk. But actually giving birth to a child, you have a higher chance of death than you do jumping out of an airplane. So saying that women aren't willing to take risks completely denies the decisions that women make every day. They are, right? But right, it's how they show that risk, it's how they exhibit that risk, right? So even the way we think about risk is kind of this male-centric, view of risk. And so we have to have like this bigger space to let women be who they are, whether it's risk takers, whether they're competitors. And, and part of it is we'll let them succeed no matter what they're doing.
Yeah. Thank you for that. You brought up something I want to talk a little more about when we factor in race. And some of the unique challenges faced by Black women in the workforce. Let's talk a little about that, Sarah.
So, I think maybe this is an unfair statement. I think a lot of people know by now that, women of color and Black women were hit hardest by the pandemic when we think about the workforce. That we see the greatest disparities in terms of being forced out of the workplace, in terms of pay gaps, actually getting larger again, leadership gaps getting larger again. And so now as they're returning to the workplace, we're seeing a lot of them, suddenly a lot of Black women be asked to be the leader for DEI initiatives. and for affinity groups and resource groups and all of the the diversity events. And because what we saw over the last year, we didn't just have a pandemic, we had this global upswelling of the Black Lives Matter movement, which is fantastic. And all these businesses looked at it and said, okay, there's consumer demand there. This matters culturally to millennial and Gen Z consumers. They made their statements of solidarity and then they didn't know what to do. So now they're turning to the Black women returning to the workplace, and they're not compensating them for the extra work of being the heads of these employee resource groups. And now I see a lot of Black women who are stuck in this very uncomfortable position of being asked, oh, well, what is your take, as like the only, where they'll be the only Black person in a room full of white people. And that's a high risk position. Do you tell people what you really think and risk retaliation? Or do you comfort your coworkers and, not really speak your truth? So, I would say as Black women return to your businesses, don't assume that they should be the head of all of your diversity efforts. If they are putting work in on that front, compensate them. And if you have them being leaders of affinity groups or employee resource groups, have them at the table for your business strategy meetings then. Don't just silo them over here, with the ERGs. Have them, use that as something that influences how your business grows going forward. So have them at the leadership table when you're making business strategy decisions. That's how you show that it actually matters to you as a company.
Yeah, amen to that, Sarah. I often wonder if people really recognize some of the very difficult situations, the pressure to be all things to folks within your company, at home, in your community. And so I think that goes unnoticed often. Chuck, you're a big proponent of internships and experiential learning, and you are in a field that is more traditionally male dominated. So what are some things that you do to expose students to your line of work, future leaders in that field? Do you focus on increasing visibility? What are your thoughts around increasing opportunities for women?
Yeah, well, Carla, great question. So we treat internships a little differently than a lot of accounting firms. So I know a lot of accounting firms, they say that there's a lot of work in an accounting firm that we can outsource overseas, right? We don't do that. We save that work for the kids, right? So what we do is we hire way more interns. I mean, way more interns than firms our size typically do. A firm our size, I think we're bringing in like 15 to 18 interns every year. But we have the work for them. I'm not against outsourcing work. I'm not, but we'd rather keep that in and allow these students to have the experience. We know that we're not going to hire all those interns as associates at the end, but it's really important for us, for the community, to give these, and I hate to use the word kids, but to give these kids a great experience, a great internship experience. Let them see what's out there. Let them get busy. And then as chairman, I take them all to lunch and we talk about how it's going. And the ones we don't hire, we keep in touch with just to make sure they found their way. But I think it's really important at our firm, what we do very early in a person's career is we take the training wheels off pretty early. So at Apple Growth Partners, soon after becoming an associate, we start putting you in front of the client. Now, obviously that's with some oversight, but there's a lot of firms that keep people in the back room for a long time in their career. And so it's really critical for us that people learn to make their mistakes. They learn how to correct their own mistakes. So we take the training wheels off early. And I will say this too, in accounting, I think it's starting to become more female dominated. We're just seeing that trend within the last maybe 5 to 7 years. So everything I'm talking about here, I believe, is positively impacting women in the workforce. because we hire so many, we give them, we work so hard to give them a good internship experience. And then if they get hired on, we really let them go at it and become a seasoned professional much earlier in their career than they would probably at another firm.
Yeah, thank you for that. When we spoke last week, Sarah, you did talk some about some of the challenges in terms of how women in the workplace are exposed to learning opportunities, skill building opportunities. I want to weave that conversation into this, but I'm going to take a question in the chat that's relevant right now. So hold that thought and we'll come back to it. This question comes in from KM Adams. The conversation about women having a seat at the table and in leadership being able to speak up when things are wrong is fascinating. As a Black woman, we have unique challenges speaking up because we are seen as the angry Black woman. And even when our ideas influence positive change in the companies, can the panelists speak on that and ways to open up conversations to allow our unique perspectives? And then secondly, I think we also need to address the intersectionality of women in sexual orientation / gender identity spaces and the economic impact of that on workspaces. Thank you, KM. Who wants to tackle that question first?
Oh yeah, I can start. So I think one of the biggest misconceptions we have about women in the workforce is one, that we're too emotional, and underlying that is that emotions are unproductive. And I think both of those are not true. In my own experience, I have not witnessed women to be the ones that were more emotional within business, but I will leave that where that is. But the other underlying thing is that emotions are unproductive. And I think anger is the most underrated emotion, and that we discount it as if it's not productive. But when we see something wrong in the company, it's usually because we got angry about that thing and we wanted to fix that thing. And that anger is actually what gives us passion and causes the transformation within that company. And so we often don't allow women the space to be angry, but especially Black women, we don't allow the space to be angry. And they get labeled as the angry Black woman. And underlying that is also the assumption that they should not be angry. And generally telling women that they should not be angry usually doesn't go well for anyone in any household or any company. So one, we have to give women the space to be angry, and that often means allowing that anger. And so that means finding maybe someone else who's angry about the same thing. So in my company, we didn't have a policy called tenure extension, which actually saves the university money while actually making their employees happier. And I was angry about it. And I found another woman to be angry about it. And we kind of let ourselves be angry with each other and go back and forth. And then we said, all right, now how are we going to fix it? And we created a business case for it and we sent it up to leadership. And it took a little bit of time, but we now have this policy that saves the university money and makes its employees happier because we got angry, right? Let people be angry. Let that angry be productive anger. Let them be angry. Let that anger help them, how to fix it. And especially when we think about, women of color who we allow least to be angry, right? We need allies to say, I hear your anger. I hear you. That would make me angry too. Or even if we don't understand, I don't understand where that anger is coming from. Can you explain it to me? Let's have this conversation. Can we fix it? Right? So I think we need allies kind of in this anger, and then, let it be productive. Let that anger occur and let it be productive.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Amanda. Sarah?
Yeah, I love that. That was not the take I thought you were going to come with, to be honest. and I really like it. I mean, we see a really high correlation actually between anger and creativity, and especially creativity as it relates to problem solving. So it's funny, I think back to our conversation about kids earlier, and it's more about what do you do with that anger and how we get taught what to do with it. One of the things that really comes to mind when we talk about intersectionality, and especially for Black women, is access to sponsorship. And I feel like this is something that, has gotten a lot more attention or traction over the last few years. But, something that's really fascinating and unfortunately upsetting, looking before the Me Too movement, it was 46% of male managers said that they were uncomfortable mentoring or meeting one-on-one with women. After Me Too, that number went up to 60%. And so I want to be clear that I'm not blaming the Me Too movement for this. I think this is, a misinterpretation of a lot of unfounded fears is to blame for this. At the same time, we also see in our Gen survey data in our organization that white people now are less likely to mentor or sponsor white employees than they were before the Black Lives Movement really got a lot of momentum. So if you're a Black woman, to kind of ride on Kimberly Crenshaw's analogy of intersectionality, you're standing at the intersection of both oppressions, right? And if you're standing there, you're likely to get hit by both. So we see that Black women are the least likely to get access to white male leaders in the workplace. We're also seeing that it has the biggest impact on their careers. And that's not about, needing white men to tell them what to do. It's about the fact that, over 70% of executives and leaders are white males. And so if they are largely hesitant to interact with women and people of color, that just means that you're not getting access to senior leaders. And we've really seen it be one of the keys to advancement, So I also want to say props to Chuck for taking your team's out for lunch. But it is one of the biggest roles that an ally can play is actually spending one-on-one time. And when I think about intersectionality, this is a place where white women actually have a great role to play. So, we talk about the perils of leaning in, that you're seen as aggressive or arrogant if you negotiate on behalf of yourself or if you ask for a raise. This same kind of dynamic does not apply when women negotiate on behalf of others or advocate for others, because this is not disrupting gender norms. We're supposed to be communally minded, right? We're expected to take care of everyone. And so it doesn't upset people when we stand up for others. So if you are a white woman in a position of power, you can have a huge influence by sponsoring a woman of color, because that woman of color is going to be seen as aggressive, as the angry Black woman if she stands up for herself. But you can really detour from these barriers of bias by advocating on her behalf as a sponsor. That will be accepted.
Yeah. Rich conversation. Thank you both. Chuck, we have a question for you.
Oh.
Maria DeVouvier is curious if your company pays your interns. Why? And if not, why not?
Oh, we pay them a lot. We do. It's a fierce competition out there, Carla, in our industry. So yeah, we do. We pay a good rate for our internships. They make great money for that 3.5-4 month period. I also want to add to the conversation. I really like where you went with the anger as well. I like anger. Anger means you care. And I love it when an employee cares. Now, as chairman, I have to set that tone at the top because not everybody likes anger. So I'm not going to sit here and say that everybody at Apple Growth Partners likes an angry response or welcomes it, but they're all looking at me to see how I react to it. I'm probably so open to that sometimes it could border on disrespect to me. And I know that makes people uncomfortable sometimes too. As they say, as a leader, that person could have been more respectful, but I don't care about that so much because I like it when someone actually has passion and cares. And it also, you catch me on the wrong day and you're expressing that anger, it might rub me the wrong way for 5 minutes or so, but I always come back to, thank God I work in a place where someone felt safe to speak up like that. But it's a tone at the top to accept that anger. So I do like the anger. I like it.
Yeah. Anger is passion, right?
Yep.
So Amanda, we This segues perfectly into our conversation last week around social infrastructure. I want you to talk some about what that is, and does a lack of it, social infrastructure, correlate to the most common barriers that women face in the workplace?
Yeah, so I want to start by talking about infrastructure in general. So when we think about infrastructure in general, right, what it is and what it does, right, it supports and connects households and firms, right? So we think about physical infrastructure, we think about roads and bridges, and this helps connect me to my job. But it's harder to see other types of infrastructure. So childcare, for example, right? Yes, I need a road to get to my job. I hands down also need childcare to get to my job. It is just as important, if not more important, to have quality childcare. And so when we think about childcare, it's absolutely infrastructure that helps connects households to their jobs, to markets. So when we think about social infrastructure, right, social infrastructure that kind of creates and supports social connections, it can sound a little bit kind of fluffy, right? Oh, it's meeting up with your neighbors and making these connections. But these social connections are especially important to support workers and especially to support women. So women are still more likely to take on the childcare responsibilities, to take on those shopping errands, to take on doctor's visits, and to deal with a sick kid. And when we are trying to figure out work-life balance, how to deal with the errands and doctor's visits and, vet visits, whatever it is, a social infrastructure helps, making sure that we have the connections we need to say, oh, like I had to call up my neighbor one time, I'm going to actually be 3 hours away from my kids and no one's going to be in the city where they're in their childcare. If something happens, could that call go to you and you get them at the daycare? I will be back by the time I need to pick them up, but technically no one will be in the same city as my kids for 3 hours. Right. And so I had that because I had a good social connection to my neighbor. Those social connections are especially important to women. And it also relates to unpaid work that women do, right? Women are more likely to do that unpaid work of caring for children, doing the errands, all the doctor's visits. But when we think about women of color, they're especially affected by the lack of social infrastructure. And we're talking about childcare, schools, libraries, parks. All of this is social infrastructure. And it tends to be especially underfunded in the types of communities that women of color tend to live, which means we are putting the burden of underfunded schools and libraries and parks typically on the backs of Black women. And they step up. They tend to be community leaders. They tend to be grassroots organizers. They tend to be the ones who go out there and work to improve the environment, water quality, housing, access to food. But this means there's a lot of burden placed on women, right, to deal with the underfunded social infrastructure we have. And that affects women in the workplace, right? They're dealing with all of these gaps we have in underfunding the social infrastructure and bringing it with them to the workplace. And the workplace can also step in here when we think about making sure that, we have that work-life balance that we're missing from social infrastructure.
Ah, very nice. Sarah, anything to add to that? Or Chuck, any thoughts? Social
Yeah.
infrastructure.
I mean, it's funny when you say infrastructure, I thought about it the other way for a second, that I was thinking about what having women in the workforce adds to infrastructure overall. Because, in the United States, if we reached full workplace equality, we benefit from a predicted 2.1 trillion extra in GDP. And that ends up going back into our infrastructure, and it makes us a stronger country. And it, you end up in this virtuous spiral. That's fantastic. And, also when I think about infrastructure, one of the things that came to mind for me, I know we do a lot of talk about childcare, which is super important. It's one of the reasons that, we had a she session from the pandemic, right? But I also think about expanding our idea or definition of what caretakers leave looks like. The other thing that's hitting women really hard right now is that we're becoming part of what's being called the sandwich generation, in which, as people are living longer, a lot of us are also having to take care of our parents who maybe have retirement funds that are running out because of increased longevity. They have more healthcare needs. And so we see that 76% of the caretaking done in the US right now is non-professional, meaning individuals caring for their families or their loved ones in a non-paid way. And 80% of those caretakers are women. So they have other jobs, they may have kids, and now they're taking care of the in-laws, and the loved ones. So I'm really hoping, we've seen maternal leave grow into, paternal and family leave, which is great. And I hope in terms of infrastructure that we really start to support caretakers leave that has a broader definition, because you also may have a lot of women who, are childless or choosing to be child-free that are still going to need an equivalent kind of leave.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank
Sarah,
you.
Sarah, that's a great point. I know we had the question about the intersection of also gender identities. And so I mentioned we created a policy. So it is for, and actually we made sure that we had the verbiage in there, primary caregiver, right? So primary caregiver, most obviously, right? A woman is pregnant, has a baby, you're the primary caregiver. But for same-sex couples, right, who are having a child a different way, or as you mentioned, elderly parents, or even a family member who is sick, right? We made sure to have this kind of inclusive language of, a primary caregiver, and you can tell us how you're the primary caregiver, whether it is through adoption, whether it is through caring for a sick parent. There's a lot of way to be a primary caregiver, and it's not just, for heterosexual women who are pregnant. And what this also kind of reminds me of is when we think of creating policies that tend to especially help women, like these primary caregiver policies, they also help men, right? Because on the other side of this pregnant woman, there's a man too, right? And he's a caregiver. And so really creating policies that create work-life balance, especially helpful for women, but it also helps men, and it helps, everybody, regardless of your background, to have better work-life balance. I think we all want that.
Yeah.
And to
Chuck,
your
I see you
point,
shaking your head.
yes, well, Carla, I love everything that's been said about this. And in addition to having cutting edge leave programs, I think companies need to hire more people. So what happens is, I think employees, they can have all the programs in the world, but they're still under the pressure to to have a workload that they didn't sign up for. And I know at our firm, I think we're just now starting to get good at this, but we realize it takes a lot of people to run a company. It takes more people than you originally estimate. Let me say that. So I would encourage companies to cut into your profits and hire some more people to do the jobs, because it just never fails any company I go to. It just seems like there's too much work per person. And then I think these leave programs are amazing, but the person still doesn't have a great quality of life because they're still under pressure. Now, I make that proclamation with all due respect to the fact that there is a labor shortage in this country. So if I tell a company, hey, you need to open up your wallet and hire more people, they're going to say, I can't find any people. So I get that, and I want to give deference to that point. But I do think there's probably, I think some companies could maybe turn away some work, maybe if their employee headcount just isn't quite where it needs to be. So I just think that needs to be combined with programs as well.
Yeah, thank you for that. I hear creating a sense of belonging. I hear the inclusion aspect of this conversation and workplace wellness, right? In Chuck's comments. So I want to transition to the pandemic, this thing we're all experiencing right now. And we know how it has altered where we work, how we work, and actually the work that we do. So I want to talk specifically about the impact of the pandemic on women. And just to pick up where we left off, Amanda, at the macro level, what happened to women in the workplace when the pandemic hit?
So this pandemic-induced recession was different than the last one. So the last one, we heard in the intro kind of was the man session, and this one was more of the she session. So typically in recessions, they tend to reinforce pre-existing economic trends as kind of this hammer. Like if you didn't get what's happening, globalization, automation, right? This is kind of a cruel way to make sure you get it. But the pandemic was actually different because the pandemic itself, because this was a virus spread by people-to-people interaction, then it actually hurt the very industries and jobs that are people service based, which had been growing in this country. So it actually took away years of advancement women had made, but also industry had made, the services industry. And so it actually kind of really took away, the progress we had made. And that was especially for women who tend to be in these people skill type jobs. So we saw that women lost, somewhere near 1 million more jobs than men because of the types of industries they're in, people-based industries, but also because of the lack of childcare, and that some women had to just step away. And what that means is we have concerns about, right, recovery, right? We had job loss in the exact types of jobs our economy was growing, needing. And now they're gone. And they're the types of skills we need to recover from an economy. So my research finds that cognitive skills and especially people skills are the most important skills to recover from a recession, to adapt to new economic conditions. And those are the exact skills that women tend to more often bring to the workforce. And so I have real concerns about recovery and what recovery might look like without women, because at least in previous recessions, we found that when we don't have those skills, people skills, it's going to take you longer to recover. So we need to find a way to get women back in the workforce and also to get them back in jobs that are meaningful, which is another hard thing to do. Because research shows that when you step away from the workforce, whether it's because of a recession, whether it is because you are stepping away from the workforce for a time to take care of children or an elderly parent, you're punished when you come back. You have what we call this kind of wage scarring, right? So this is going to be a long-term issue for the women who did have to step back, that they're potentially going to be punished, consciously or not, right, by those employers that hire them back. They're more likely to be hired back at lower wages than they were before the pandemic. And so this pandemic caused a lot of problems just being a pandemic, but there are some big concerns I have about our economy going forward in how we're going to recover when we have the job losses that we did.
Thank you for that. Sarah, what other things are we going to learn from this pandemic, especially around flexibility and ways to move forward to be more inclusive workplaces and spaces for women?
Yeah, when we think about moving forward, I think part of it is going to be having to address what happened. I've talked to a lot of organizations in which employees are feeling this sense of like, okay, we're just moving forward, and we never paused and even, applauded ourselves for surviving. But when I think about one of the things that happened, it was really fascinating to see during the pandemic. A lot of organizations, if they were, in fear of what the recession was going to do them financially, their people budgets were the first thing to go. So HR, DEI budgets that previously were for inclusion and equity efforts, that's the extra, right? That was one of the first things to get skimmed off the top. So, we had clients we were working with that stopped their work with us because, they essentially said, we're sorry. It's just that we fired our entire people analytics team. That was, one of the first areas to gain some financial security. And then we would also see within 48 hours that they were making, LinkedIn and online statements about how they stand in solidarity with Black Lives Matter and women and their underestimated groups. And the thing is that people saw through it. There were a lot of exposés from Bloomberg that now have screenshotted companies that a year ago said, we care. And now they're looking at their diversity numbers and saying, but did you, because a lot of them were the ones that turned out the worst. So I think companies are going to recruit women and to recruit underestimated individuals, they're going to have to talk about what they're doing. So it's not going to be good enough anymore to put the statement of solidarity on your careers page and say, we care about women and minorities. I work with a lot of companies to create actual equity strategy statements on their careers page that say, these are the steps we take. You know, we do blind resume reviews, we do structured interviews to debias our interviews, we do pay gap audits, you know, we have paid leave. You've got to talk about the actions that you're actually taking as an organization that underestimated groups want to see. Instead of just saying we care, we're actually seeing that some organizations, we looked at EEOC data around this, are faring worse than organizations that say nothing if they just say we care, but don't talk about what they're doing. It's actually better to say nothing than if you can't back it up with evidence. And, you know, going forward, looking at flexibility, everyone's trying to figure this out, right? Do we do a mandate to come back to the office? Do we, you know, let people do whatever they want? How do we work this out? And there is an equity issue here if you just let people do whatever they want, because women are still stuck with the majority of childcare and caretaking duties. And so if you say people can do whatever they want, the men will be able to come back to the office and a lot of women will stay at home. And you get this out of sight, out of mind dynamic when it comes to, you know, who's top of mind when a promotions opportunity comes up, who gets thought of as a leader. It's the person who's been able to have FaceTime. And so we're really recommending that organizations put very, you know, structured processes in place that show what are the criteria for a promotion. You know, are these things that people can meet remotely? You know, have you met your revenue targets? Have you met your sales targets if you're an accounting director? And making sure this is going to be the time that is most critical to really have criteria clearly defined for promotions, you know, as we go forward. And we're probably going to see a gender imbalance of who we actually see in the office to keep things equitable moving forward in terms of advancement.
Yeah, there's a lot of information in those comments. We do have a question from the chat box from Claire. And some of your conversation has already hit on this in terms of how organizations might need to understand the negative impacts of the lack of support for working mothers. And then Sarah, you hit on how they can overcome some of that, moving from statement to actual action.
Yeah, definitely. I think, you know, one of the things that Amanda just spoke to is how people, and especially women, are penalized when they've taken a break from the workforce. So we've seen two things work that we suggest when it comes to caretakers leave or maternity leave. One is a keep in touch program. And the idea is that it's up to the employee. So this isn't saying mandate that employees have to stay in touch when they go out on leave, but give them an option. And a lot of times they want to. We see a lot of new mothers who are like, I didn't want to be completely out of the loop for 3 months. You know, I wish we had a check-in once a month in which I found out what was going on in the office. So really important before they go out on leave to sit down with someone and say, okay, what do you want your pre-leave, during leave, post-leave, you know, communication to look like? You know, do you want to be CC'd on emails? And what this does, it also helps the stigma. You know, as long as this is really well communicated, like, okay, Sally's going out on leave, this is her keep in touch plan, then people are actually less likely to doubt her when she goes back to the workplace. And one of the other things we recommend, you know, don't not consider people on leave for promotions. Just because they are on leave doesn't mean that they've stopped being functional and that all of their previous work doesn't count. You know, they still have done all the work that they did before they went out on leave. So, you know, if you have promotions opportunities come up, consider people who are on leave and broadcast really loudly. If you promoted someone who is temporarily out on leave, you know, and talk about the position that they'll be in when they come back. And that will make other mothers see that, you know, they are included in that workforce and they're taken seriously.
Mm-hmm.
I love what you said about flexibility, but in there, you kind of are also talking a little bit about understanding someone's boundaries, right? So one thing that I really hope we take from the pandemic is that we can be more flexible and we can offer a lot of places, not every place, but a lot of places can be more flexible in offering some virtual work. And I hope we continue to realize that we can give women more flexibility and it doesn't necessarily hurt the bottom line. But within that flexibility, there's also some boundaries. Do you want to be contacted while you're on leave? Do you want to be emailed at 7 o'clock when you're having dinner with your family, right? Because we get the little ping, right, on our phone that, hey, you got an email from your boss at 7 p.m. And even though your boss might not say, well, I don't expect you to return the email, right? Seeing that little ping at 7 p.m. might feel differently when you're sitting with your kids trying to have dinner, right? So some of this might also be setting boundaries that even though, so I do tend to work at night when all the living beings are asleep, right? But I don't necessarily want emails from my boss at 11 p.m., right? So that might mean, setting those boundaries of, maybe I will write the email, but I'll schedule it to send at 9 a.m. the next day or on Monday morning, can help that work-life balance and set those boundaries. And I think in understanding those boundaries, everyone's boundaries might be different, right? So some people might say, I don't mind an email at 7, doesn't stress me out to see it. I'll answer it when I get to it. But it might feel like you're crossing boundaries for some people. And so part of that is the conversation. And when we think about how people were affected by the pandemic, when I talk to other women and their experiences in the pandemic and recovery, what I found is that a lot of them were lacking the conversation at all of just asking, right? Is this crossing a boundary, right? Are you exhausted right now, right? Do you want to come in? And it was often that the conversation just didn't happen. What am I not doing to support you right now when it's a shutdown and you're with your kids right now, right? I didn't often hear those conversations, and most of the women I know didn't hear the conversation happening at all from leadership. And so I think sometimes just the conversation, what are your, and that, Sarah, you mentioned this, right? When you're on leave, do you want to be contacted? If the answer is no, got it. If the answer is yes, I can do an email, I'll check it when I get to it. Great. Now you understand those boundaries, but did you know that, right? You're having that conversation of where are you at? How are you affected? Because people might also be affected in ways that we just wouldn't guess.
Yeah.
I would also add to that, Amanda, that employers that are hiring post-pandemic or post-leave or whatever, I encourage employers to think bigger about what constitutes values. So I heard some points brought up about, well, this person took a break. Well, that doesn't mean they can't bring specific value to your company today. And I really do believe a lot of leaders take a short-sighted approach to someone's resume or their background and say, well, you can't you can't get to this position with less than 3 years experience. Well, maybe that person's really fast. Like maybe their 3 years is equal to most people's 7 years. And I just think employers need to think bigger when they're filling positions and not so much make assumptions about what a leave means, what a break means. I just think they got to think about what's the value today.
Yeah. Well, Chuck, I want to transition to you a little bit here. You make some changes during the pandemic in your workspace. What types of shifts did you make happen, and how did they align with the challenges that you see today as a result of the pandemic?
Yeah, so what we did was like a lot of companies, we went home for a while, and then we invited everybody to come back, but but it was optional. And the writing was on the wall. 20% came back, right? And even after let's just say 20% on any given day came back. So it was pretty clear to me what the populace was saying. Now we did a survey to confirm that, but by December I had it, and I just came out and I told the whole firm, I said, we are work from anywhere forever. I said, in this world of so much uncertainty, I'm going to give you some certainty right now about one thing. We're keeping this model forever, because I just knew there was no going back. And what it's done for us, and this, by the way, I'm not saying I'm right about this. I could be totally wrong, and the whole world will eventually want to come back to the office. I just don't see it. So what it's done is it's opened up some doors that weren't really there before. So immediately I saw that as an opportunity to start recruiting people from around the country to come work at Apple Growth Partners under a work from anywhere program. Now, I had that thought a year or two ago, but people would have thought I was crazy if I did that. I'd reaching out to someone in Fargo, North Dakota, say, hey, you want to come work for us out of your house? They'd be like, what are you talking about? But it's just become in vogue now. People accept it. So it's opened up. I mean, I just feel like it's the whole tearing down the boundaries has opened up so much opportunity for talent and picking up new clients. We just, because the country now accepts this activity of breaking down borders, I'm taking advantage of it, of that opportunity. And so that's the biggest way we've changed, is we've gone to a work from anywhere hybrid program. To Sarah's point, there's a lot of rules and regulations that need to be built around that to make people that choose to not be in the office to feel as important as anybody in the office. And that's going to be a constant practice of, and it affects everything. It affects promotions, meetings. There is no, and you know, you talk about FaceTime. We've got to give virtual people the same attention and value that someone who comes to the office, and that's just going to take time and effort.
You sort of hit on this already. I was going to ask you if you're starting to notice any benefits to the work forever from anywhere.
Well, yeah, Carla, and you know, it's a big reason I went to work from anywhere with the firm is our productivity was really good during the pandemic, and I didn't see any signs. I mean, I actually saw improvement, and I attributed it to the fact that people had autonomy. They could maybe alter their sleep schedule to what they wanted. You know, people took that autonomy, and I think they gave even more. So I just couldn't look the employees in the face in December and say, all right, you're all coming back now, even though you proved that you don't need to be in the office to do your job. You're all coming back because 25% of the population, they need to see you working. I could not make that argument. And so I actually think it's working pretty well, like better than when we all went to the office. In fact, there's been a couple moments where I've thought to myself, gosh, why didn't we think of this earlier? Like, we've had video conferencing technology for years. Why did we not? Why were we driving to the office every day at 8 o'clock? What were we thinking? So, but.
Well, and I want to applaud. I mean, what you've done there is say that you trust your employees, which is a form of respect. And it's something that we've seen, and I'm not saying, don't pay your employees well, but it's something that we've seen in our data that, employees would trade a chunk of salary for respect, that you really have to pay them a lot to make up for it if you've made it clear that you don't respect and trust them. We are talking to so many organizations where I'm a little bit blown away by how many are just putting a policy out there and saying this is what you need to do, and there's no real reason or evidence behind it. It's just like, okay, back to normal. And people feel like, okay, so did my employer not trust me while we were out during the pandemic? What does this mean? And some organizations have good reason, where it's like, I do a lot of social research. We do a lot of social research. I think it's important to do focus groups in person. But even that, if we're studying human behavior, if a lot of human behavior is shifting to being remote, maybe that's what we study then, and I think just the organizations that adapt early are going to be the ones that have the competitive edge for sure.
Yeah, thank you for that. Let's transition a little to misconceptions and what will drive change here moving forward. So we've had this conversation around the micro and macro levels, and women being key economic factors in that. But we also know that women, particularly Black women, face bias that they need to combat every day. We know that changing the ways in which we operate, how we work, where we work, and how organizations promote individuals can be challenging and met with pushback. So let's talk about some of this for a moment. And I'm going to start with Amanda. What are some of the most common misconceptions that people, both men and women, have about women in the workplace?
So I've already mentioned one of the biggest misconceptions about, emotions and that they're unproductive. Not true. So the other big misconception we have about women is that all the other stuff that we're kind of, we talk about being burdened with childcare, things in our community, just being married or being a mother or caring for a parent, right? All this other stuff makes us less productive and less valuable in the workplace. I find that is totally untrue. That being, married or having children, being a mother, all these other things that make us who we are actually provide value for a lot of different reasons. One, we are more likely to understand our communities, the connections, how women are shopping, women are making most of those shopping decisions. And so the very thing that, some people think might make us less productive can actually make us more productive by finding more insight. But also I found, even as a mother, right, when we are focusing on so many things, right, you don't have any choice but to be efficient as women, right? You don't have a choice to be like, oh, well, I just have this one thing that I'm doing. And right, there's no choice, right? So there's a lot of efficiency that comes with that, of wearing these different hats. And so I think it's a big misconception that being a mother, being a woman, right, is something you have to kind of overcome. You just have to learn how to take that value and use it.
Absolutely. Sarah, you talk about misconceptions as well that exist relative to the type of work that women are doing and want to do, and the opportunities and training that they wish to have access to. What can you say about the impact of this and how it might drive change in the future?
Interesting. Well, one of the things we see that I think a lot of organizations aren't aware of are the kinds of opportunities that get promoted to men more often than women, and, often unintentionally. So, if I look at my inbox, it has a lot of subject lines in it that say things like, bring your whole self to work, and like work-life balance, find it, keep it, accessing your authenticity in the office. And it's not that these don't have value, but, I think a lot of women, if you're in the audience, probably have similar inboxes. Men's inboxes do not look the same. Even within, their own companies, if you look at their employee email, they get a lot more opportunities for project management seminars, get your Salesforce certification, coding classes. And so, in our Gen survey, our general survey that we keep open to the public, we looked at our data around this and we asked, in the last 12 months, have you been offered an opportunity to participate in building technical skills or building business critical skills? And we saw that men were 68% more likely to say yes. And, we paused and said, okay, could that have to do with the job they currently have, right? Men are just more likely to already be in technical or business critical roles. And so we controlled for that. And we saw that even within technical role groups or business role groups, men were still 57% more likely to say yes. And so even if you as a woman are a project manager or in a technical role in your company, male project managers are more likely to have, an opportunity promoted to them that's more business critical. So managers will think of their male employees when these opportunities come up and say, hey, Bob, I think you should go check out this certification. Even if there's a woman in their group with a similar background. So, we really encourage, if you're going to communicate to one person that this opportunity exists, like take that opportunity to just communicate it to your whole department. And if you are sponsoring a woman or a person of color, maybe nudge them and say like, hey, did you get that email? Did you see the thing that we sent? And on what Amanda just said, when we talk about kind of underestimating moms in the workforce, for example, that's something that you can counter in your job descriptions. So treat those as transferable skills. One of the best things I think LinkedIn did recently, they did this in April, you now can select like stay-at-home parent as a job so that you can put it in your resume history. And what they've done there that I think is brilliant is really associate the skills that have to do with parenting with a professional context. And so, one of the more successful tech companies I've worked with here, the guy who has like the most successful team, he hires former hospice workers, kindergarten teachers, and he put in the job description, parenting is considered a transferable skill. He put it in there, and it makes it far more likely
Love it.
that parents are going to apply because they know that they will be taken seriously. And he says, tech I can teach, coding I can teach, crisis management, juggling multiple priorities, all of that. That's the stuff where you have to have had experience. So if you, are broadening your scope to consider those skills, actually write it into the job description or application page.
Very good. So time flies when we're having fun. I am being asked to move us into final remarks. And I would like for you, within your closing remarks, to just talk a little bit about how people can continue their learning across these topics that we've discussed today. If you have any book recommendations, Victoria would like to know what they are. And so, Chuck, I'll circle back to you for final remarks, and then Amanda and Sarah.
Thank you, Carla. I believe everything starts with inclusivity. So you have to start there. And I truly believe that diversity will start to naturally happen if you can practice good inclusivity. Obviously, inclusivity alone will not work completely, but it's a great place to start in an organization. And then what happens is people feel safe to be themselves at work. And naturally, a company, I believe, is going to have more women rising to leadership positions. And one thing I say often is we have women in leadership positions at Apple Growth Partners, and I would never want any of those women to think that they reached that position because they're a woman, or even that it factored into it. They got those positions because they're awesome and they earned it. And so I think it's a fine line we walk, right? And I really feel that if a company can practice inclusivity, keep a safe place, great things are naturally going to happen. I think the other thing I'd like to add is I think a lot of employers forget that people spend most of their life at work. I mean, it just seems even if they're working from home, they're spending a majority of their time at work. And it's a source of identity for people. It's a source of dignity for people. And I think companies really need to honor that. There's a huge human element that's just beyond profit making and everything else. These are human lives that are investing in their company. They've made a step to come practice with your company. We have to return that dignity. We have to return that and allow them to go ahead and attach their identity to the company if they want to, and just treat them with dignity and respect, so that many, many years from now, when they're retired, they can look back and say, wow, that was a great experience. And I feel like I made a difference at that company.
Thank you, Chuck. Amanda, final remarks.
Thanks. Wow, Chuck, now I'm considering actually becoming an accountant so I can come work for your company.
Thanks.
It was so great to be here on the panel. I really appreciated, Carla, your leadership here, and Sarah and Chuck. It was such a great conversation. I would just want to close with a couple resources. One of the books I read recently that I love is called Invisible Women, and it's about how data is biased in our world. Oh, I know, I seriously love it, right? And it just shows you how important data is in terms of the right metrics. I know Sarah's talked about the right metrics for promotions, right? Getting the right metrics out there, understanding metrics, but also understanding when you don't have the data. And right, I am a data-driven person, right? So that book really spoke to me for women, for our economy, for business, that we need to get the data out there. We need to understand the data and get the data if we don't have it. So that's a great resource out there. Another one is What Women Want, a science-based way to understanding, women in the economy is a great one. Just to think about how women approach things differently when it comes to our economy. There's a lot of resources out there, a lot of books that are great. So I think I would just close with saying that women bring value. So yes, there are equity concerns here, right? But I'm the heartless economist who's saying, like, yeah, but really this is about your bottom line. So if you want to improve your bottom line, you need women. They need to be in leadership positions, and it can't just be one, right? Women need support, and they come with great allies, great bosses like Chuck, but also great colleagues that they can support each other. And when you have this environment where you have that great boss and you have the supportive environment, I think most companies and most people are going to be surprised at how their bottom line, their profits do better when they have this environment that fosters anybody. And one, we think about women as being less risk. I think in a lot of ways, women are really ready to be the risk takers. They're ready to make changes, and change is risky. And that can be really hard for the people that have been in this company for a long time. But so just give women the space to be different, let them take some risk. And yes, some of them might fail, but even give women the space to fail. Women need the space to fail too. So I think that a lot of companies can really improve their bottom line by just opening up a little bit and being more inclusive.
Thank you. And Sarah, you have the task of moving us into our closing remarks here.
I'll attempt. Yes, I'm also a huge Caroline Criado Perez fangirl. So Invisible Woman is a great book. I just finished Rebel Ideas by Matthew Syed. I really recommend it if you want to learn more about collective intelligence and how that plays out. It's a fascinating book. And I put our website in the chat, not to promote us, but because I can't be verbose and I'm aware, but we measure like 212 indicators for our equity certification for businesses. We've put them all on the website. We've put all of our research on the website. We've Teslaed it. So theoretically, you could go there, go down the checklist and say, okay, are we meeting all the indicators? Are we doing all the things? And, never need to give us a call. So that's there if you want those resources. There are kind of two parting thoughts I have. One is hire an expert. Two is make DEI boring again. As we think about moving into the future, I think a lot of businesses are like, great, we're inspired. We're going to start a diversity task force, invite people to, the break room on Wednesday to bring their best diversity ideas. It takes expertise to do inclusion right. I've worked in a lot of fields, and this is by far the one that has required the biggest diversity of soft skills and technical knowledge of any field I've worked in. I think people think it's just feelings, but really it's like, I have to understand vendor and supply chain management, to get inclusive vendors and manufacturers. I have to have a legal background to understand your liability involved in an employee survey. I need statistical analysis skills to think about how to make your data intersectional. It really takes expertise to do this right. So in your DEI efforts in the future, please work with an expert. And don't be afraid to make DEI boring again. Like I said, we have 212 indicators we go through to certify organizations. It should be less rah-rah cheerleader, here's a great event that is recognizing you once a year. And it should be integrated into the fabric of your business. It should be full of KPIs that you're meeting that are boring upstream processes, because your end results are exciting enough. You end up with a boost in innovation, a boost in profit, a boost in customer visibility. All of that is exciting. We don't need DEI to be a fireworks show. It is something that you take as seriously, and is kind of as mundane as the rest of your business processes. So treat it like the rest of your operations. Take it that seriously.
Thank you, Sarah. And thank you to each of you for joining us this morning. This was a great panel. We covered a lot of ground. I want to thank our audience for participating with us this morning. We hope you found this event to be interesting. We hope to see you at the Women of Achievement event on July 27th at 8 a.m. This will be a virtual panel featuring women of distinction, including Dr. Jennifer Savitsky, Ramona Hood, and the 2021 Woman of Achievement Award winner, Dr. Rachel Talton. The registration link is in the chat. We hope to see you there. Have a great rest of the week, everyone. Bye.